pretty much an island. I talked to
Alec,
Woodbridge.
Alec, let me stop you there. Thank you for the snapshot. Keep working your way here. We could use the help. Judy Woodruff in Washington. Judy, what do you got?
Aaron, joining us now, our congressional correspondent Kate Snow for an update on what some members of Congress have been doing. We know they've been evacuated from the Capitol building, but Kate, you've been learning about some of their assessment of what's happened. I'm sorry, we don't have that audio connection with Kate. I can report that sources are telling CNN's national security correspondent David Ensor that there are, quote, good indications that people with links to the Osama bin Laden organization are responsible for today's attacks. We can't do much better right now at identifying these sources, but again, they're saying good indications. And this is, again, no proof, but this is very much in line with what high-ranking people have been telling us throughout this day, all the way from former NATO Commander Wesley Clark. General Wesley Clark told us hours ago, and then again just a few moments ago, we spoke with him just a few moments ago. He said that there are very few organizations that would have the sophistication, the financial resources, the organization, the network of contacts to carry out an attack this sophisticated, this organized, where you have planes hitting these key locations in New York City and Washington, the Pentagon, within just minutes of one another. People who could take over the cockpit of an airplane and presumably push the pilot aside. We can't imagine that any pilot would knowingly fly an airplane into the Pentagon or into any place where there were people. That some of these people with connections to the terrorist organizations must have been at the cockpit. Joining us now, and I believe he is in a studio, George Terwilliger, who has had a career of following the activities of intelligence organization, has become an expert on terrorist activities. I'm sorry, we're not going to go to George Terwilliger. We're going to go to White House spokeswoman, Counselor Karen Hughes in Omaha.
And I'm here to update you all on the activities of the federal government in response to this morning's attacks on our country. As you heard from President Bush a short time ago, the federal government is acting to help local communities with search and rescue and emergency management operations, to take all appropriate precautions to protect our citizens, and to identify those responsible for these despicable attacks on the American people. While some federal buildings have been evacuated for security reasons and to protect our workers, your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his Cabinet and National Security Team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then, and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
Karen, how will the president stay in Nebraska?
Return to the White House?
Will he go to be back in Washington, Karen? Will he address the nation? If the vice president can stand...
Presidential Counselor Karen Hughes in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters of the FBI talking to reporters, and very unusual, she did not take questions, which normally would be the case for someone speaking in a spokesperson's capacity. But what we heard from Ms. Hughes is that all appropriate precautions are being taken. She said the president is in a secure location, the vice president, and is in continuous contact, she said, with Vice President Cheney. She mentioned again that Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld is at the Pentagon. Secretary of State Powell, she said, at an undisclosed location. She said she went through, ticked off a list of measures that have been taken to assure that the federal government of this country continues to operate. She said a plan was put in place after the first attack on the World Trade Center this morning, and she said it has been in operation ever since. In an effort to be reassuring, she said on high alert, the United States forces were put on high alert. American embassies abroad, the same thing. She said not just the president and the vice president, but also when you think about the succession to the presidency, the Speaker of the House would be third in line after, or second in line after the vice president. She said the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, has also been put in a safe, or taken to a safe but undisclosed location. CNN's senior White House correspondent John King at a location since the White House was mainly evacuated about a block away. John.
Well, Judy, Karen Hughes working throughout the day in the White House Situation Room in the basement of the White House, had a fortified structure.
A great deal during the day. It's going to last for a number of days. We told the president that we thought that the whole rescue effort would take a week or so or more. But the main focus right now, obviously, is on saving as many lives as possible. I think it's still possible for us to save a lot of the people that are there.
You said that we're in a state of alert, but I'm wondering, people who say, well, how come you're in a state of alert when all of our police and firefighters are there?
They're not all there. All of our police and firefighters are not there. We have a lot of police and firefighters. Bernie, do you want to explain where the police and firefighters are?
Do we have a death toll, Mayor?
No, we don't.
We do not, and we're not going to put one out until much later, after we get a better sense of the numbers we're talking about.
The police and the police deployment is, primary focus is down in southern Manhattan in the rescue effort, but we're tending to our policing needs all over the city. We, as the mayor said earlier, we're getting assistance from the governor and the National Guard. About 200 National Guardsmen about 2 hours ago, about an hour ago, I guess. There'll be another about 1,500 sometime this evening. They come in to help us. And we're going to continue on the rescue efforts, but policing will go on in the rest of the city as usual.
State of alert for other possible actions. How is that going to work?
Obviously, we're in a high state of alert. We're looking at other government buildings, securing those buildings, securing other areas in the city. Right now, our primary focus and our efforts are in southern Manhattan.
One more, please.
I don't think anybody. The mayor and I were there this morning. I was there when the second plane hit the building. I was right underneath the building. I don't think anybody would have imagined that one of those airliners would have hit the building like that. Nobody in their right mind would have thought that would happen. So, and in this circumstance, it was something we couldn't avoid. We couldn't have stopped, even if we tried.
Thank you. Thank you.
Come in.
We've been listening to Mayor Rudy Giuliani, obviously fairly close to the site where the rescue operations are underway in New York City, reassuring that every effort's being made to get as many people out and to hospitals as they possibly can. Now, back here in Washington, let's return to our senior White House correspondent, John King. John, and let's talk about what the White House is doing, and some of which we heard about from Karen Hughes, who's a counselor to the president just a minute ago.
Well, Judy, some of this involves security precautions, which is one of the reasons the president is not yet back in Washington. He is now in Nebraska at a military air base conducting a National Security Council meeting, although at the White House they are putting a priority to getting him back as soon as possible. They believe that picture of the president returning to the White House would send a powerful signal. You heard both Karen Hughes here in Washington, Mayor Giuliani just again in New York, trying to reassure the citizens that the government is at work despite these atrocities today. They very much want to get the president back. Now, from an operational standpoint, the vice president and the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in the Situation Room in the basement of the White House. That is the command and control system used for natural disasters, used for terrorist attacks like this one, used in the case of major military operations. That has been up and running throughout the day. The senior staff at the White House operating out of that. Ms. Hughes, on the one hand, trying to send reassuring signals, saying the government was up and running, the financial systems were up and running. Yet on the other hand, she too noted the remarkable paralysis this event, these terrorist attacks, have caused in the United States. Commercial air systems shut down nationwide at least through noon tomorrow. Security officials still not confident enough to bring the president back to Washington. So Karen Hughes delivering a statement, bringing us up to date on the activities and the movements of the president and the vice president, at the same time saying the United States government still looking into who is responsible for this. And I know David Ensor is standing by with more information. White House officials saying their early indications are that they believe, and David may have more information, that these attacks are linked to the suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden. Judy.
All right, John, you are right. David Ensor, our national security correspondent here in the studio in Washington. David, I know you've been on the telephone. What have you been able to learn?
U.S. officials are saying that they now have new and specific information, and they say this information is good indications that people with links to Osama bin Laden may have been responsible for these attacks. I asked, is this new information that's come in since the attacks? Yes, it is. Is it specific in nature? Yes, it is. Now, they're not completely eliminating the possibility that the attacks could have come from somewhere else, not ruling out a Saddam Hussein-inspired attack or some kind of combination of Palestinian groups or some other combination, but good indications that people with links to bin Laden may have been behind the attack. And this is new and specific information, the officials say. They are also expressing a certain amount of what I think is best described as anger at the